Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, let's unpack this big topic today.
Yeah.
Screen time. And specifically, how it connects, or maybe doesn't, to young people's mental health.
Right. It's a conversation that's, well, everywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And usually it's all about how many hours,
Yeah.
counting minutes, setting timers.
Mm-hmm.
But today, we're doing something a bit different. We're diving into a really significant study, this one's from JAMA, that asks, well, a more nuanced question.
It does. It asks, is it maybe the addictive nature of how kids use screens that's the real issue for their mental well-being?
That's the core of it. So not just time, but addiction.
Precisely. And this study, it gives us this fresh perspective. It moves away from just adding up the hours and looks at these longitudinal addictive use trajectories.
Trajectories. So like how things change over time.
Exactly. How an individual kid's pattern of potentially addictive use evolves as they grow. It's dynamic, which is, well, much more realistic, isn't it?
Yeah, that makes sense. Life isn't static. Okay, so before we get into the findings, let's talk about the study itself. This wasn't just a small survey, right? This was a major effort.
Oh, absolutely major. It pulls data from the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study, the ABCD study.
Okay.
Think massive. It's a huge population-based study here in the U.S. They've been following thousands of kids since they were about 10 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, tracking them for 4 years between 2016 and 2022. This specific analysis looked at, let's see, 4,285 of those kids.
4,000. Okay, that's a solid number. And tracking them over time, that longitudinal aspect, that seems really crucial here.
It's fundamental. It lets you see patterns emerge, not just a snapshot.
Right. And you said the big shift was looking beyond total time. How did they actually pin down this idea of addictive use? It sounds tricky to measure.
It is tricky, but they were quite methodical. They didn't just, guess. They focused on 3 specific things: social media, mobile phones, and video games.
The big 3 for kids, basically.
Pretty much. And they used validated questionnaires tools that have been tested and are known to measure these things reliably.
Like what kind of questions? What makes it addictive versus just, using it a lot?
Good question. It digs into the psychological aspects. So for social media, it might be asking things like, do you spend a lot of time thinking about social media even when you're not using it? Or do you feel a need to use it more and more to get the same feeling?
Oh, okay. So tolerance, preoccupation.
Exactly. For phones, maybe, does the thought of being without your phone make you anxious or distressed?
Yeah, I could see that.
And video games, questions like, do you play games to escape or forget about your problems? Or have you tried to cut down on gaming but found you couldn't?
So it's about loss of control, using it to cope, negative consequences. Classic signs of addiction, really.
Precisely. And they didn't just treat all answers equally, they used weighted scores.
Weighted.
Meaning, the questions that really get to the heart of addictive behavior, like that loss of control or preoccupation, carried more statistical weight in the analysis. It adds precision.
Okay, that makes sense. So they measured addictive use carefully. What about the mental health side? What were they tracking there?
They looked at some really serious outcomes. Suicidal behaviors, and that included planning, preparing, interrupted attempts, actual attempts, really the full spectrum.
Wow, okay. Heavy stuff.
Yes. And also suicidal ideation, thinking about it. From passive thoughts like wishing you weren't alive to active thoughts with a plan.
Got it.
And then they also tracked internalizing symptoms, things like anxiety, depression, and externalizing symptoms like aggression or rule breaking, mostly based on parent reports for those.
Okay, so we have addictive use patterns measured carefully and serious mental health outcomes tracked over time. Now, about those trajectories you mentioned, how did kids' addictive use actually change over the 4 years?
This is where it gets really, really interesting. The patterns weren't all the same. For social media, they found 3 main paths or trajectories.
Oh.
There was a group whose addictive use was already high and sort of peaked. They called it high peaking. There was a group that stayed consistently low. But then there was this third group, an increasing group. Nearly a third of the kids, 31.3%, fell into this group.
A third? Wow.
Yeah. They started lower around age 11, but their addictive use climbed pretty steeply, reaching levels similar to the high group by age 14, and it just kept going up.
Okay, that increasing pattern is really notable. What about phones? Similar story.
Very similar. Again, 3 trajectories: high, low, and increasing. And that increasing group for mobile phones was also substantial, about 1 in 4 kids, 24.6%.
So a quarter of them showing escalating addictive phone use up to age 15.
Right. Their use climbed steadily until it hit those high levels.
But video games were different, you said.
They were. For video games, they only identified two main trajectories: a high addictive use group and a low addictive use group.
No big increasing group.
Not really. Those patterns, high or low, seemed much more stable over the 4 years for gaming compared to the rising trends seen with social media and phones.
Huh. That's a fascinating difference between the platforms.
It is, and it suggests maybe different dynamics are at play.
But still, the prevalence, even without the big increasing group for games, you said nearly half the kids had a high addictive use trajectory for phones.
Yeah, 49.2% for high mobile phone use and over 40% for high video game use. These aren't small fringe groups we're talking about.
No kidding. And those increasing groups for phones and social media add another big chunk. So who tended to fall into these higher risk trajectories? Were there demographic patterns?
There were, and they're important for context. Gender showed some differences. For high addictive social media use, there was a slightly higher proportion of females, about 51%.
Okay.
But for high addictive video game use, it skewed heavily male, about 70% males in that group.
Right, that fits some common perceptions, maybe.
It does. Race and ethnicity also showed differences. Kids identifying as Black or Hispanic were more likely to be in the high addictive use trajectories across all three: social media, phones, and games.
Okay.
And socioeconomic factors seem to matter too. High addictive use was more common among kids from households with lower incomes under $75,000 a year, or with unmarried parents, or parents who hadn't completed a bachelor's degree.
So there are links to gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, suggesting vulnerability isn't evenly distributed.
Exactly. It points towards needing to understand the context around the screen use.
And did these groups already differ in mental health at the start of the study?
Somewhat, yes. The study noted some baseline differences. For example, the high addictive social media group started out with slightly higher rates of suicidal behaviors and externalizing problems. And the high video game group started with slightly higher suicidal ideation and internalizing symptoms. So some pre-existing risk was there.
Right, which is important. But the real question this study tackled was how these trajectories themselves, the path they were on, predicted future mental health.
That's the absolute crux of it. And the findings were pretty stark.
Yeah.
Both the high trajectories, ANA, those increasing trajectories of addictive screen use, were strongly linked to a higher risk of suicide-related outcomes and just generally worse mental health scores 4 years later.
Both high and increasing. So it wasn't just kids who started high, but also those whose addictive use grew over time.
Exactly. That escalating pattern was a major red flag.
Can you give us a sense of the scale? How much higher was the risk?
Well, for social media, being in either the high peaking or the increasing addictive use group meant you were looking at roughly a 2 to 3 times greater risk of suicidal behaviors down the line.
2 to 3 times. That's significant.
It really is. For the increasing social media group, the specific risk ratio was 2.14. So yeah, more than double the risk compared to the low group. And both groups also had higher risks for suicidal ideation.
Okay. And phones and games.
Similar story for high mobile phone use, linked to higher risks for both suicidal behaviors and ideation. High addictive video game use also linked to both those suicide outcomes.
Right.
But interestingly, high video game use showed the biggest relative jump in internalizing symptoms.
Like anxiety and depression.
Exactly. The difference in their average scores was quite noticeable compared to the low use group.
Okay, so clear links between these addictive use patterns, high or increasing, and worse mental health outcomes later on. Which brings us back to that elephant in the room.
Total screen time.
Yeah. What did the study find there? Did just spending more hours online show the same links?
This is probably the biggest headline, the most surprising finding for many people.
Okay, lay it on us.
Total screen time measured at the beginning of the study was not associated with suicidal behaviors, suicidal ideation, or those internalizing or externalizing symptoms 4 years later.
Not associated at all.
Nope. And even when they statistically adjusted for the addictive use patterns, total time still didn't emerge as an independent risk factor.
Wow, okay. So let that sink in. All the focus on just hours, hours, hours. And this huge long-term study suggests that on its own, it wasn't linked to these specific negative outcomes.
It really challenges that narrative, doesn't it? It strongly suggests that focusing just on the clock, the quantity of time, might be missing what really matters.
Which seems to be the quality of that engagement specifically. Is it becoming addictive?
That appears to be the much more important factor, yes. The pattern of use, the nature of the interaction with the screen, not just the duration.
So If you're listening to this, maybe as a parent or educator or just someone concerned, what does this actually mean? How should this change the conversation?
Well, it suggests maybe shifting focus. Instead of primarily battling over time limits, which can be important for other reasons, like sleep or physical activity, of course,
Right, sure.
maybe the focus needs to be more on recognizing the signs of addictive use. Are they preoccupied? Are they losing control? Using it to escape? Having withdrawal if they can't use it?
More about the why and how, not just the how long.
Exactly. And particularly for social media and phones where they saw those big increasing groups,
Yeah.
it highlights that this isn't something you just check once when a kid is 10. You need to keep assessing, keep talking about it as they move through adolescence because that risk can really emerge and climb.
Whereas for video games,
Mm.
maybe since the patterns were more stable, earlier identification might be more feasible if there's a problem.
Potentially, yes. The study itself suggests future work interventions should really target this addictive use aspect, not just blanket time reduction. Maybe that helps avoid unnecessary restrictions on kids who are using screens in a non-problematic way.
Could tracking these addictive use signs become like a screening tool in doctors' offices or schools?
That's a question the study raises, definitely. Could monitoring for these signs help identify kids who might need more support? It's plausible.
Now, we should be fair. No single study has all the answers. What are the caveats here, the limitations we need to keep in mind?
Absolutely. Good science acknowledges limits. First, it's observational. It shows strong links, strong associations, but it can't definitively prove that the addictive use caused the mental health issues.
Right. Correlation isn't causation.
Exactly. There could be other factors involved. Also, the data on screen use and some symptoms was self-reported by the kids or reported by parents. That can have biases.
Sure. People might not remember accurately or might downplay things.
Mm-hmm. And the study didn't look at multitasking, kids using multiple devices at once. And critically, it didn't account for a lot of other really important things happening in a kid's life, like bullying, sleep problems, feeling socially isolated, family issues, things we know deeply impact mental health and might also interact with screen use. Those are definitely areas for more research.
Okay, so important context. But even with those limitations, the core message seems pretty powerful.
I think so. This deep dive really pushes us to reconsider how we think about screens in young people. It strongly suggests it's less about the sheer number of hours and much more about how that time is spent specifically. Are addictive patterns developing or escalating?
It shifts the conversation from quantity to quality, or maybe quantity to compulsion.
Well put. It's about the patterns of addictive engagement and how they change over those crucial teenage years.
So the provocative thought to leave everyone with, if it's really these addictive trajectories that matter most, what does that mean for how we actually help kids? How do we build digital literacy and mental wellness support that focuses on recognizing and addressing addiction, not just counting minutes? How does understanding these pathways empower us to do better for the next generation online?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Moving from this insight to effective action.